Enjoy the ride with Crystal Petrie Consulting.
And again, Seth and Winslow, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast, because I really want to give my audience and give people an opportunity to really learn about the Republican Party and not just the sound bites that we see so much on like the national news and things like that. So I'm so appreciative of you both being here. So the Republican Party, let's talk about some of the issues that I feel, and maybe you do as well, are important to the Republican Party. Issues like tax reform, government spending, and fiscal policy. How does the Republican Party approach topics like that?
So if you want to start with fiscal policy, so I actually have a graph that I pulled up, and it looked at Kamala. I don't know how to pronounce it. Some people say Kamala, some people say Kamala. And then her policy, her priorities, they're going to be if she gets elected versus Trump's. And yeah, there's, like Seth said, there's like the one area of contention with Trump's particular priorities is there's questions about the tariffs and what that would actually do. Like it could lower the deficit for just a little bit, but then because of like in response to how much it's going to cost other companies and stuff like that, it could backfire. So that's the one fiscal part of his priorities that I think there's a little bit of question on. But in general, I mean, he wants to cut corporate taxes, which and he also, here, I'm going to pull these up because it helps for me just to have that all right here. Yeah. So yeah, his is increase. So this is for China. He wants to implement a 60% tariff on goods from China. Amazon's not going to like that. Increase in investment restrictions on key Chinese sectors tied to national security. Increase restrictions on semiconductor exports to China. Revoke China's most favored nation trade status, and phase out imports of essential Chinese goods. So he's really giving the finger to China with his priorities. And hers is not as much. I mean, you know, she wants to target tariffs at industry and geopolitical rivals, including Chinese technology products. So it's not that Kamala is like totally pro-China, but at the same time, he's definitely going to put more restrictions on Chinese goods. So he also wants to, so this is about trade right here. I don't necessarily want to talk about that, but there were, taxes. Yeah. So he wants to reduce the corporate tax rate to 20% from 21%. So that's not necessarily like a humongous jump. She wants to raise corporate taxes to 28% from 21%. So that's more of an increase, which I thought was interesting. And then, so he permanently wants permanently extend quicker capital expenditure depreciation rules enacted in the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And then I know that the people that are small business owners and people starting companies are really concerned about the capital gains tax that would happen if Kamala was elected or Harris was elected. So I know that in general, his policies will help big business, but also small business. And I think that that's just something to think about if you want to start a small business, and also save money, not have as much money taken out of your paycheck. I mean, right now, and it affects the middle class. Like right now, I'm probably taxed from anywhere from 22 to 24% out of my paycheck. And I feel like that really hits the middle class and upper middle class pretty hard. So I'd like to see, that's why I'm supporting him, because I'd like to see me be able to save more money and pay off my student loans and things like that. So on an individual basis.
And I do know that when former President Donald Trump was president, one of his policies that he really talked about and really hit hard on was the export and import that we have with China. So the fact that he's bringing that back and wanting to continue that is actually a good thing.
Yeah, and I think he wants to incentivize American companies to thrive. So we can actually, maybe they'll sell on Amazon more than I know China. We get their products for pretty cheap. So I think, and it's just very easily accessible because of how cheap it is. But I think even though it doesn't sound good right off the bat for companies like Amazon, really, you know, that you can still sell your products on Amazon as an American-made company and as a private company. So, or small business. So I think that maybe it's just him just trying to shift towards empowering American companies, and more products to be manufactured in America. And it's not, you know, it's not going to happen overnight. Like it's going to hopefully increase over a period of time where we bring more industry back here. So that's what I hope to see. If he's
And
elected.
Seth, would you like to add anything to that, talking about tax reform, government spending, and fiscal policy?
Yeah, I think if you know, just looking at the broad strokes of both platforms, you know, the Republican platform is generally lower taxes and lower regulations and, you know, growing American business and you know, getting our spending house in order at the federal level. And the Democrat platform traditionally has not had the emphasis on cutting taxes and has had an emphasis on increasing domestic spending. And I mean, those are, a lot of it comes down to that, you know, is do you want the government to, you tax more and do more, or do you want the government to tax less and do less? And we generally agree that they should tax less and do less.
Now, the next topic is something that's just been widely debated for years and years, and that is border security and immigration reform. Seth, I'd like to start with you on this. What is the Republican policy on those two items?
Traditionally, the Republican platform has been to secure the border, to limit illegal immigration to as close to zero as we could possibly get it. Zero is the ideal. And that we have a legal immigration system that meets the employment needs that we have in this country. But at the same time, knowing that if you have a ton of immigration into the country, that it makes life more difficult, makes opportunities more difficult for American domestic workers. Nothing against, you know, people, immigrants coming to the country. But, you know, we want that to be managed and be at a level that makes sense. Makes sense for our social services reasons and for our employment reasons as well. The border has been a disaster the past 3.5, 4 years. It's been a lot of immigration from, and not just, you know, Latin and South America, but from all over the world, or, you know, coming through the sieve that is our southern border. And that is rightfully, I think, a priority of the Republican Party and of Donald Trump right now. And, you know, we're here in Georgia, and I went to University of Georgia. There's the particularly salient case of Laken Riley, who was killed in Athens, not far from where I used to live in Athens. Actually, I used to walk past where she was to take the bus. And she was killed by somebody who was apprehended at the border in 2021 under Joe Biden's presidency, was released into the country, and then he assaulted and murdered her. That we can draw a direct line from that tragedy to a policy decision of the Biden-Harris administration.
And Winslow, what would you like to add?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've seen, so they basically had over 8 million illegal immigrants flood the country. And like Seth was saying, it really puts, so they, you know, the Democrats tend to like to talk about, oh, their housing, you know, housing affordability. There's not enough homes that's why we have this crisis of housing affordability, because we have not enough housing for people. It's the available housing is not there, but it's like, okay, well, y'all just allowed for, you know, I think the total number like 25 million or something like that, or 20. Well, I thought it was 8 million at one point, but then I don't know. I might have gotten the numbers wrong.
I think it's about 20 million total.
20, okay.
And I'm not sure
I thought
what
that JD Vance said 25 million, but maybe, but he was it was in response to somebody talking about the affordable housing, there not being enough housing. He said, well, what about the 25 million or the 20 million illegal immigrants that have come into the country? And that you want to talk about there not being in housing, but then you're letting in all these illegal immigrants. It's flooding the housing market. And also paying for them to stay in hotels and stuff like that. So, and then it's not to mention just them coming in illegally, but also the criminal activity that's increased. You have those Venezuelan gangs, and it was Aurora, Colorado, I think it was, yeah. Recently that have committed a lot of murders, and like you said, the Lake and Riley situation was very tragic, and then many other situations like that that have occurred since with this border policy and just lack of policy, I guess. And so it's to make our communities safe. Like, it makes it very unsafe. I mean, we should be able to go out on a college campus in a park area and run without fear of something bad happening to us. I live in Sandy Springs, which is north of Buckhead, and I go running in North Buckhead in this park called Chastain Park in Atlanta. And I feel fairly safe, but I still sometimes will put a mace on my wrist, around my wrist when I run. And I usually try not to run in the dark. But with that being said, I think that with Trump's border policy, it'll help deport the illegal immigrants. They should not be here. And then, there's immigration reform is something we can always talk about and try to pass. The legislators pass good legislation to try to make it a little bit more clear as to how, if people really want to come here and live a good life and work hard and be a tax-paying citizen, and there's a more direct path towards that. I think we do want people here that will work hard and also pay taxes as well. And this just want to pursue the American dream just like anybody else. And as Republicans, we believe that we want hard workers here. But there has to be a legal process. There has to be a standard by which you are an American, and just to know that anybody born here is privileged in that way, just of the mere fact that we're born here and we're already citizens. I think that people need to be reminded that so many people risk their lives to get here just to pursue this opportunity to live a better and safer life. But if we're just having an open border, letting all these illegals in, where among those are a lot of criminals, then that's going to also deter from the American dream, because we want to have opportunity, but we also want to have safety as well. So,
yeah, and I'll add that I mean, compared to some other Republicans, like generally pro-immigration, but legal immigration.
Right.
Yeah, and the legal process can always be talked about, and try to be reformed. My brother, for instance, is engaged to a girl from Colombia, and they met in DC, and she's been in Colombia most of the time they've been together. But she just had her last interview. But yeah, it was they had to wait. There's a process to go through, and sometimes it's not very clear. But in the end, I think that Republicans, Democrats need to talk across the aisle about how to keep the standard of what's to become an American. What is the standard to becoming an American, and getting here legally, and contributing to the workforce in a way that's going to benefit the common good of all.
Winslow, I think that is profound what you said, that they need to discuss it across the aisles about the best way for an immigration policy and to allow for people to become American citizens. My question is, do you think that's possible? This is a question for both you and Seth. Do you think it's possible to have that conversation across the aisles about the best pathway forward to citizenship?
I think so. I think that, like I said, and I don't like putting people in boxes, but basically just ideologically speaking, moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats, like the radicals are never gonna, you see that in Congress. You put Marjorie Taylor Greene and an AOC in a room together, they can't talk things out. They're too radical. No. So people that have common sense and that maybe have certain issues that they're passionate about and they're they may believe this and then the other person may believe that, and they may not agree on everything, but usually we can agree on something, like if we're rational people. You know what I mean? So I do believe that there is hope for that. But I do think that those of us that are more, I would say, common sense conservatives need to speak up and also produce content. And I wouldn't say be a loud voice, because usually the radicals are loud voices, but just get our voices out there to say, hey, we're not like, we're just like people of different races don't want to be considered a monolith. Like, I'm just going to vote this way because of my race or socioeconomic background. If we identify ourselves as a conservative or a Republican, that doesn't mean everything about what we believe. I think, but like the core principles are the same, and we're bonded over those values. But on certain social issues, there can always be a little bit of variability, because there's always there can be a lot of gray area in those issues. So I think that in order to get anything done, whether it's in Congress or what have you, you've got to talk across the aisle. And maybe I get 60% of what I want in a bill, talking across the aisle to a moderate Democrat that will say, okay, well, if I can get this, you can have that. And that way we get something done, because not everybody can have it all their way all the time.
Right. And Seth, what would you like to add? Do you think it's possible for people to talk across the aisle and come together on a sensible, common sense, as Winslow put it, a common sense pathway to American citizenship?
I think we can, and did see an example of people coming from both sides of the aisle to come up with a proposal on some immigration reform. There are some things that we can agree on. I think where people get hung up is that you need, even though you have individuals coming from each of the two parties to come up with a proposal that they hope will get done, you have people that just kind of dig their feet in and are just unwilling to give up that 20% that they need to get something done. But I think it starts with having a clear-eyed, factual idea of what the issues are, and then determining the solutions from there.
Now, since both of you, Seth and Winslow, are members of the Young Atlanta Republicans, it is safe to say that both of you identify as Republicans, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So my follow-up question to that is, why did you feel like the Republican Party was the party for you?
That's a great question. So, and I've been asked that many times. Sometimes we're inspired by something that will lead us to seek out truth in things, so we can have a better understanding of what's real, what's not real, what we believe in, what we value. I really wasn't. I mean, I'm a physical therapist by trade, and in my 20s I did musical theater. So I don't really come from a political background. It was more something I became interested in about 5 years ago. So I'm a little bit later into the game of it, but I'll tell you just a brief story, synopsis of why I was seeking out young Republicans, young conservatives to engage with. Was my mom. She's now retired early intervention teacher. So I grew up in Macon, Georgia, Middle Georgia, and she taught early intervention for about 15 years or so. And so inner city public schools. So a lot of her students were not on their reading level in their grade. And she saw a lot of things in the culture in which she was immersed in that she could see it was not a great environment for children to grow and thrive and learn in. And she could see a lot of corruption just with traditional public schools and what they were doing with their money, how they were spending the money. And it wasn't really to enrich, the children's lives and their learning experience, and a lot of testing, but not really any experiential type ways of learning, teaching. And so her focus was on reading. So to try to help get them up to speed with their reading. And so and during that time, she started listening to Candace Owens, who really inspired her with that particular community. And then that, then if you listen to one, then you start listening to all the other people in the conservative thought leader movement, the conservative movement. So she kind of was like, you should listen to this girl. And listen, I like Candace Owens. I think on some of the things, I think she gets a little far-fetched and is sort of not exactly, we don't agree on every single thing that she says. But in general, I can see how she was trying to say, hey, like conservatism is actually where our community used to be conservative. We used to be this, but then certain legislation was passed, like the Great Society Act, and completely just broke up the family, and there was a degradation in a value system, and that leads to not a priority on emphasis on education or valuing education, and then you have poverty and generational poverty and dependence on the government and all these things that just it ends up increasing crime in the area, and just and that's the woes of our society are people that live this way. And so I just was inspired, like maybe I am more conservative at that point, because I grew up in the theater. Theater tends to be very liberal world, and so in general, at least in the past few decades. But I don't know. I just got inspired to just start listening to her, and then some other people like Ben Shapiro, and then Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson, and just kind of turned me on to conservatism. And so I was seeking out friends at this point in time, and I stumbled upon Atlanta Young Republicans online, and I just showed up and kept going to all the meetings and happy hours. And sure enough, during a pandemic, I had all these new friends. And then next thing I know, I'm the vice president of membership, recruiting people to the club and to the party. And now I was elevated to the role of the president. And so it's been kind of an adventure the past few years. And so it's helped me find purpose, like outside of my just daily work life.
Excellent. And what about you, Seth? Why did you feel the Republican Party was the party for you?
Me and my family, we've always have had an independent streak. Wanting to do things on our own, and that said, there's been times that we couldn't do it on our own, and needed some help, needed the SNAP and TANF and unemployment and things like that, the social safety net that helped us get on and get back to self-sufficiency and having that independent streak and doing it ourselves again. It was a safety net, not a hammock. Not going to hang out there all day. And product of public education. I think those things go back to what I was talking about earlier of, give everybody a shot, give everybody an equal shot, a level playing ground to do the best that they can to the best of their ability, and a hand up, when somebody falls behind, but not a, life of dependence on the government. Don't ever want to end up in a situation that a lot of families are in, where if they, are working hard, but they need a little help, but if they, get a raise or change jobs and they lose their benefits, it's sort of like, well, I can make more money, but then I'd lose this, which I've been, right. Has been the basis of my income. So I think that's it, is, personal independence too. And again, just knowing the right level for the government to be involved in somebody's life.
We know we have to have good government for military, for national defense, for infrastructure. We have to have all these things. And we know that there can be, if we had just I'm more of a pro-capitalism type believer, but and I know that we just had capitalism, no government, then yes, and there would be the very, very poor and the very, very wealthy, right? Because there's just going to be that disparity when you have people that have all different kinds of talents and upbringings and things like that, and work ethic. Like not everybody has the same work ethic. Some
Right.
people are just lazy. You know? And so,
Okay.
but I think, we want a society that rewards hard work,
Hmm.
because there's no matter what you do, and we believe this as conservatives, is there's dignity in any job, right? Even if it's
Right.
cleaning toilets or doing something that you find completely nasty, like there's dignity in it, and somebody has to do it in order for us to have a better society. And so, but some of the best leaders are the ones that actually will get on their knees and do the dirty work too. So, I think that, yeah, there's a freedom in not feeling like you have to, especially those of us that are able-bodied and able-minded, to do for ourselves. And listen, yes, I think that upbringing and raising kids, like that's how kids are raised, is everything, almost everything to do with the outcomes in their lives. It's been shown through a lot of studies, that when kids have a healthy, two-parent household, that are teaching them good values, reading to them at night, like trying to instill in them like good values, and those kids end up better off in life and performing better. And that's where, when we talk about the nuclear family, that it's just so important to prioritize that when we're talking about raising kids, because those kids are going to be the future of our country.
Absolutely.
And so I think that, yeah, so, the main message, just like Seth said, to people that think Republicans are just selfish people that just want to make money and keep money and, take money from people, or, take more money or have more a piece of the pie of this, like, this imaginary pie of money. And then the conservatives just want to take that large piece of pie, and everybody else that's not how it works. Like, because, when you have a free market capitalism, it doesn't work like that. And if I really do believe, if you're able-bodied and able-minded, and you work really, really hard, and you live your life with good values, you can live at least a middle-class life. And that's comfortable, and so that's what the message I want to tell people is, like, if you put your mind to something, you can at least live pretty comfortably, and you feel that freedom of having to not depend on this external safety net, like you said, that's only just giving you cookie crumbs. You're never going to have upper mobility if you're just depending on that. So but the growth can be, in terms of your finances, can be exponential. And education is huge, with that too. So
We are currently about 20-ish days out from the election, out from voting. And of course, the main topic is the presidential election with former President Donald Trump and current Vice President Kamala Harris. Why do you think Trump should be, and this is me assuming that you do, why do you think former President Donald Trump should be the president coming?
So, I'll answer that, and you probably hear it all over the news too, for people that want him to win. And we kind of hit up on all these anyway, but it's better economy, lower taxes, for middle and working class families, especially, border security, and less crime, increased safety in our domestically.
And Seth, what about you? Why do you think former President Donald Trump should be the next president?
Well, I think it's pretty easy to look at the past couple three years and see the things that have gone wrong at the border with inflation, and with the state of the world. I thought about this afterwards. To part of the answer to your previous question is the foreign policy and national security policies of the Republican Party, the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal that killed 13 Americans, deadliest day in Afghanistan for Americans in years. What's going on in Ukraine and now Israel, and it seems like so much is unraveling in the world. Compare that to the previous 4 years. It's pretty peaceful. No new wars anywhere, and a managed immigration system and a thriving economy.
What do you think the message from Donald Trump should be to swing voters who have not decided either way if they're going to vote for Donald Trump or if they're going to vote for Kamala Harris? What do you think his message should be to them?
Well, currently his message is look at the last 3-4 years, and was your life better before when I was president or better in the last 4 years? And if people really think about that and think about not just their personal finances and their pocketbook, but also, like what's happened out in the world, like you said, world war, how do you say that right? World wars, international unrest, and then the border security, and then how many jobs that's taken away from Americans, and how much he wants to empower American industry. I think if he sticks to that message alone and doesn't listen to all the other voices, then he can really he will sway them, because Kamala has not been able to answer questions directly at all. She always turns it back on Trump. Like we're not even talking about Trump with a lot of those questions she's been asked. So I think that if he can just stick to that and not just sling insults and things like that, I think that he should be able to win those people that are on not really liking his personality and liking the things he says and how he treats some people. But just look at the policy over the personality. And that's been the biggest message, I think, even before the 2020 election was, policy over personality. And now we've seen the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. And for people just to think about that, if they're really paying attention, I think a lot of people don't actually really pay attention. But people that are paying attention, that are the swing voters, if he can just stick to that message, border security, inflation, better economy, then international peace, then he should win.
And Seth, what do you think Donald Trump's message should be to swing voters to get them to vote for him?
Mm-hmm. I think Winslow hit most of it. I mean, he's, we have seen what he would do as president on foreign policy, on immigration, on the economy, and we have seen what Kamala Harris would do because she's been vice president for the past almost 4 years. And you can choose which one of those that you prefer. So I think that's the message.
Seth, do you think, since both of you are part of the Young Atlanta Republicans, do you think the candidates, both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, are reaching out to the young voters?
I think they are. I think they are. I would like to see a little bit more talk about things that are specifically important to us that I feel like have been left out of this a little bit. I mean, for folks our generation, and Winslow and I are fortunate enough to where we each own our own homes, but there are a lot of people our age, our generation, that haven't. And be frankly honest, the only reason I was able to is because I got a VA loan and didn't have to put money down. But so housing is something that everybody we talk to that's our age talks about it. If you're renting, it's tough. If you're trying to buy your first home, it is tough. If you already have a home and you're looking to move, you need more space, your family's growing, it's tough. It's hard to find something. It's hard to afford what you can find. I wish the candidates would talk a little bit more about that and the multitude of other issues that we could spend another half hour talking about that we think are important to us. But I think they are. I'm blown up all the time with digital ads, on all the apps that young people like to be on. And I mean, you see Donald Trump going to college football games. There's they're getting out there for sure.
And Winslow, what do you think? Do you think the candidates are reaching out to the young voters enough?
I mean, it's never a bad idea because we do make up a huge voter base, and I'm talking 18 to 40, which is what, to be a young Republican, you have to be under the Young Republican National Federation. Is their national rule that to be a member of any chapter, you'd be 18 to 40. So that's a huge voter base. And I'll say this, like I almost feel like people, Gen Z, especially, I'm not a Gen Z, I'm an older millennial. I'll age out in 2 years of the wireless, but Gen Z, I feel like are much more involved in knowing like what is going on and what the issues are than even I was in my 20s. I feel maybe that's just my perspective because of just the trajectory that my life has taken, but I just don't remember. I remember some people feeling, it's more the social issues, especially in the theater world where I grew up, and they tend to focus a lot on the social issues and that trigger emotions and stuff like that. But I just don't remember us being as involved in politics as a lot of Gen Z are now, and taking a stance. So, you have certain organizations like Turning Point USA, which is founded by Charlie Kirk, who is definitely, he and Trump is definitely an organization that is trying to just give out messaging to young people at colleges about conservatism, and yeah, Charlie Kirk is kind of on the Trump bandwagon with everything on the Make America Great Again. And so I think through organizations like that, they're trying to reach young people. And like he said, Trump, went to UGA game, right? Wasn't UGA? Yeah, recently. So I think he's trying.
Which we lost, so don't go back.
Yeah. But I will say are they doing it enough? I mean, it's kind of, I'm sure their campaign staff, they have certain people, they targeted groups of voters like suburban women. Like Trump just came to Forsyth County and did a little talk show with what's her name? Sorry, it's Friday. I'm really tired. Was it the Faulkner Report or something like that? Faulkner. She's on Fox News. But he was just interviewed by a Fox News anchor or reporter or anyway, a host up in Forsyth County, and so it was all women in the audience. So, and they got him, asked him questions about certain issues, especially with like girl sports and the crime and safety and things like that. So I can see now, like this go round, he is actually trying to engage with people in different communities and different targeting certain types of voters. And so more than he probably was 4 years ago. So in terms of Gen Z, I think that there's been some of that. There could always be more, I'm sure, to try to win over the young vote. But I do think that they have people like Charlie Kirk that are actually trying to go out to colleges and influence the culture, and be a thought leader behind conservatism. So in that regard, I would say Trump is at least engaging to some extent, but it would never hurt to find opportunities to engage more before this election.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to kind of stay on women here. Donald Trump wants to, which he succeeded in doing, the abortion rights, putting that in the state's hands. Mm-hmm. Kamala Harris stated that if she's elected, she will put it back in the federal hands. I would like to hear your opinions on that case as far as abortion, which is a huge topic during this presidential debate.
Yeah. So 2 years ago when Roe versus Wade got overturned and it was taken back to the states, to me, that was like an act of like empowering states' rights, because every state has a different economy, different culture. And then they choose like how they want to do handle that particular issue. There's like the moral part of the moral turpitude part of it. And then there's like the legislative part of it. Because the abortion issue is so nuanced, right? Like not every situation is the same. Correct. Our heartbeat bill here in Georgia is basically, the controversy over that is like the time. So it's like if you can have an abortion if it's 6 weeks or less. So the whole idea is once the fetus reaches 6 weeks, it has a heartbeat, and that's considered murder in the eyes of the legislature. Um, and so so it is, and that's a whole is it really, there's argument of, is that really murder? Is it really a human being or not? And there's the moral part of it, and the moral part of me says that that's a life that should have a chance to live. But then you have like I can't talk, sorry. The political part of it is like, okay, should a governmental body basically make medical decisions for you? And in that regard, I say no, because there are medical exceptions, and there are tons of situations that could happen where women need to seek health care to help with that particular issue because it's compromising her life or her reproductive health, or and the abortion, if you want to call it that, if it's a non-viable fetus, I don't really think that's truly an abortion. It's just a medical procedure to remove it if it's not going to live. And that should be determined by the doctor. But 64% of, and I believe this is nationwide, 64% of abortions are actually because it's an inconvenience, or they don't feel like they can afford it, or they're not in a situation where they can support the child, that they don't feel like. And so that's tough. And I would say, I just don't know if I wish we had a society, and I would love to see this change in the culture, where women, if they find themselves in a situation where they have this, they're in a situation where they feel like they need to choose life or death of a viable fetus. That's sad. I wouldn't wish that on anybody, to have to be in that situation, to face that. But in one regard, I don't think the government should say, the government doesn't determine if it's truly a medical exception. But I would love to see is there be different organizations, especially through the church or through synagogues, or for women to find refuge where there can be some other option where they can help, provide some medical care, ultrasounds, and then connect them with families that maybe want to adopt. That would be a very beautiful thing. And so then they wouldn't have to live, because you don't know how you're really going to be emotionally when you choose that. And doctors also need to really say, hey, here are the risks if you do go through with this abortion. You potentially, it'll be fine, you can still have kids, but something could happen where it could kind of mess with your reproductive system. So I think they need to be honest about that. So there's risks with choosing this and risks with not choosing this, but I just wish our culture would provide a little bit more a place, like a haven for women that don't feel like they have any support, and so they can be more willing to make that choice to give it the baby up for adoption, or go through some program that will help them get on their feet and learn how to manage finances if they don't feel like they can afford it. And a program where they can potentially have some level of childcare, if they don't have a spouse that will be willing. And also the men, how are the men not held responsible too? And it's not just the woman's choice. The man should have, they should, even if he doesn't. I mean, some men just don't care, and they just, are just out of the picture. But I don't know. It's a very nuanced situation. I just would like to see there be other options for women, so they don't feel like they have to make that choice. It's like a life, it's like it's traumatic, that situation, to have to make that choice is traumatic. And I know it's a very hard decision for many women. And, I think the messaging, I can go on and on, but the messaging can be a little manipulative, because you can say reproductive rights, but I'm like, okay, but what is that? Okay. Yes. Especially if your life is compromised and your health is compromised, but if it's truly like a viable being inside of you, like why don't they not have rights to live? I mean, would you have wanted to be aborted? Would you, even if life was a little tough growing up, you still should that baby still have a chance to experience life, like the joys and the pain, of life. So it's a tough one, and it's hard for me to really say, I'm all pro-choice or all pro-life. It's kind of like, okay, let's look at the nuances of this each individual situation, because they're not all the same. And so, it would be nice to see the moderate conservatives, like I said, moderate Democrats talk across the aisle, especially here in Georgia, about this bill, and that the medical language needs to be much more defined, I think. And then, and then them talk about the whole 6-week versus 12 weeks, situation. But I'd like to see that not be the only option, women to feel like that's not the only option. And how do we do that? It's got to be a cultural shift somehow. And maybe we empower the churches to help, so, okay, I'll stop.
Okay, Seth, and what do you feel about this topic as the only man on this podcast?
Yeah.
No pressure here, but what are your thoughts and opinions about abortion being in the federal hands or abortion being at the state level?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that, the right to life is pretty foundational. I mean, all the other rights and liberties and freedoms that we enjoy are downstream of that, and, really kind of moot if you aren't given a shot to, live. And I agree with Winslow that I do wish that, there were more options, more women knew about the options that they do have if they find themselves considering abortion. And so many of them do it. The ironic thing about calling the abortion side pro-choice is so many women go after that because they don't feel like they have any other choice. They feel like this is going to ruin their academic careers or their professional careers or something like that.
It shouldn't have to.
Right. And they're not aware of what they can do. They may just overthink, what their parents are going to think. But it happens all the time. And, mother and child go on to live full, successful, happy lives. As to whether it should be a state or a federal issue, it's kind of, it's a little tough, because if you think abortion is murder beginning at conception, then it's sort of hard to say that, but it's okay if they do it in Minnesota, murder in Georgia, okay,
Yeah.
Minnesota. It's kind of hard to square that hole there. But at the same time, I mean, there are nuances, and there are, maybe in some states they're okay with a heartbeat bill that, if fetal heartbeat is detected, that this is a life and enjoys the protection of the state. But if they don't detect that, then, other states may say, no. I mean, if it's, if it's a positive pregnancy test, we're going to kick it in there. So maybe 12, 15, 20, 28-week states. So there are a range of what people may be comfortable with based on not necessarily the borders of the state that they live in, but how they grew up and what beliefs they have, and what the predominant beliefs of that community are. And, I mean, that's sort of the heart of the Dobbs decision, was that there isn't a federal protection for abortion in the Constitution. And in all the times that, in the about 50 years that Roe v. Wade was law of the land, it was never codified in statute either. And so that is what put it to the states, and we can start to figure some of these things out and the nuances. But it's difficult. It is a difficult conversation.
It is. It's not,
and there
it's
are
not
certainly things that I would not want to legislate at all, particularly around, exceptions. And so, yeah.
And women's health is not just abortion too. I mean, there's so many other issues too. It's just that one, to me, it's like, what's really sucks is like, why is the women have to like they
Bear the
find themselves in
burden.
that choice, they're the ones going through it. Like the man doesn't have to physically go through anything,
Right.
So, and there's been a lot of stories of deep emotional pain and regret, like years later down the road after that. And that should be talked about too. It's like, there's just something about, gosh, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's like, the question is, would have wanted to be aborted regardless of my situation? My answer would be no. I'd like to have a chance at life. So,
Right.
and of course, yeah, if I was non-viable, then no, I was not going to live anyway. So I don't know. It's tough because, it's very triggering for women to say, oh, the government's controlling my body. It's like, that's, it's that kind of puts personal responsibility off you though. It's like, how babies are born, like, how you get pregnant. If it's rape, incest, to me, that's considered a kind of a traumatic, like medical kind of situation where that's a 1% of the abortion cases are actually rape and incest, or 1 to 2%. And so, that's not the biggest reason why women get them, but I'm sure it does happen. And to me, that's, the compromise I see with the heartbeat bill is like 6 weeks or less. And then like in rape and incest is also included in like the medical exceptions. So, to me, that's a fair compromise. It's just, I think that if women kind of say, it's empowering to like be able to have this ability to bear a child, like men don't get to do that. Like it's a gift, it's a blessing. And, I just, it should be in women, especially teenage girls that it happens to. I think that's more traumatic and more likely to get abortions as a teenager too, because I went to Catholic school. And so you would have had to leave school if you got pregnant.
Would not have been allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
at
to
all.
me, that's a little bit hypocritical. And I'm Catholic, but a little bit hypocritical too, because that, if you're going to be the church going to take such a pro-life stance, then they should, help women still continue classes and just know that things happen. This is a part of life. They shouldn't have to walk in shame, because that shame and the guilt and the embarrassment and the social embarrassment is like why a lot of girls want to do that. They just want to get rid of the problem and not have to think about it, but it doesn't mean that that's not going to resurface emotionally down the road one day, because I've seen it happen and just people I've known in my life. So where that, there's deep regret or deep emotional pain from that. So it's a hard issue. And so, no, the government should not have control over your body in terms of deciding what's medically necessary. But I do think that our culture, we need to have a cultural shift back to valuing life and supporting women, especially through, empowering our churches to do that. That's what the church should be there for. The church should be a refuge for people. It should be a refuge to come and seek help, and then they can get some guidance.
Especially have submitted early voting, which Seth stated that number is close to 1 million at this point. In the last election for the state of Georgia, there was a little bit over 100,000 that came out for early voting. Why do you think that people are showing up in such massive numbers for this election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris in the state of Georgia?
Well, I can tell you sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, so with the early voting numbers, because I was thinking about this earlier, I wanted to look them up and see what the numbers were, at least total compared. 2020 was sort of exceptional that we had so many absentee by mail votes because it's COVID. So the last presidential election compared to where we are now, I don't want to discount the enthusiasm that I think Winslow is going to talk about for this election. But there were some practical reasons why people may not have voted early in 2020, at least early in person. They could still and did in numbers we'd never seen before vote early by absentee by mail. So kind of considering that the differences in how they do it, I think there is definitely some enthusiasm for this election. I think people cannot wait for it to be over and have some commercial on TV other than a political ad in Georgia. and there's some genuine enthusiasm for each candidates for sure. I think the enthusiasm for Trump has the edge, I think, in Georgia. But and we may be seeing a shift in voter preferences of early voting versus election day voting. And it's, I tend to like to vote early. I tend to like to go ahead, get it done, get it in the bank. Don't have to worry about, what if my car doesn't start or, something on election day. I've already got it done while I was out doing other errands. Don't have to worry about it. Don't have to worry about getting caught up at work or anything and miss that opportunity to vote. So there may be a shift towards early voting, just in the behavior, and we will find out on November 6th, after all the election day votes are counted, and we'll be able to make a comparison. But pretty easy to vote in Georgia.
Yeah, so I was going to say, the Georgia Republican Party, like the Georgia GOP, they have been pushing the messaging with get out and vote early. It's not rigged. Get out and vote early. What you saw a lot in 2020 was, and Trump, unfortunately, he said something out of emotion saying it's all rigged. And so the Republicans didn't get out and vote for the Senate during the Senate runoff. And so we lost the Senate. And there was a lot of, record number of Republicans that did not show up to vote in the Senate runoff. So they're also, and Republicans tend to historically vote more on election day than early voting in the past, but that's the tides are changing with that. But this year in particular, the Georgia Republican Party has been really pushing the messaging about get out and vote early, and just trying to, on social media, like using social media to get those messages through to people. And also, those, especially the elderly that don't necessarily use social media. Some do, but some don't. My grandparents do not. Sending out mailers and just to say, get out and vote early. Here's where you can go to this website to see where your early voting polling place. You can basically go to any early voting polling place in your county, and they're putting all that information in their messaging, whether it's on social media or the mailers and things like that, and mail and emails. We get bombarded with texts and emails for the past 4 or 5 months. So, and all age groups are getting that. So, I think that it's just the emphasis that the Georgia Republican Party has put on early voting this year has been astronomical compared to 2020. So, at least in my view.
Also in Georgia, they had a bill passed where they were going to hand count the votes and the ballots. Winslow informed me that bill is no longer the case. Can you explain to us what that bill was about and why it's no longer the case in Georgia?
Yeah. So, and Seth, you can chime in here too. But the state election board, that was one of the rules that they were trying to get passed, was for them to actually hand count the votes. So it'll match like the number of votes that went through machines. And then Seth, and it had to do in absentee ballots too. That includes that. But they actually wanted to hand count, have the poll workers hand count the votes on election night to make sure that they were exactly the numbers matched.
Right. It was something that reconciliation of how many voters came through here and checked on the poll pad, how many ballots were cast on the ballot marking device screens, and how many ballots are in the ballot box. I mean, that all gets counted and those numbers reconciled and everything as part of the certification process anyway. But the state election board, sort of on their own, without, they were not trying to clarify law. They just felt like it would be a good idea to go ahead and count all that night, after at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the evening, after they've been doing this, been there at the polling place since 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, just practically, I understand where their head was at in coming up with that, but practically you're asking people who have already worked a 14-hour day probably to sit there and count hundreds or thousands of ballots and not make a mistake. And then, before you even submit the memory cards to be read to see what the results are. And again, they weren't really following any statutory direction on this. And they did it, when was that, last month, something like that. I mean, I think the judge that vacated that rule said, and maybe this was just a quippy headline to sum it up, but it's too much and it's too late.
Because I feel
too
like you would
close to the
need,
election, and
you would need more
much
poll
to do.
workers to like take over at that point. And I don't know if it's just a matter of not having the staff, because they do pay the poll workers, not the poll watchers, but the poll workers. They do pay the poll workers, however much, $100, something like, I don't know, a day.
Yeah, and they have different
But-
shifts of them. So I mean, it's typically only your most senior folks that are full-time election workers anyway, that are
and I think they would
going
have
to
to
be
hire,
doing the whole 14-hour day. But
right, they would have to
still.
hire an additional group of people to do that, because that's not reasonable to have people stay up that late and still and do that after they've been working all day. So and they had to be trained, so you have to train a whole nother set of workers probably. And so it's just we're kind of running out of time for that to be really be practical. So so he declared it as unconstitutional, the judge, and so that's no longer going to be a thing.
Okay. As we are getting ready to wrap up this podcast, Seth and Winslow, I have a couple more questions for you, and then I will let you go. What do you say to people, young and old, that feel like their vote doesn't matter?
I think that is absolutely wrong. Their vote does matter. Yes, we have the popular vote, then we have the electoral college, and there's that conflict over whether or not the electoral college should be abolished, our founding fathers really thought about everything, and they thought about the representation and states' rights and things like that. And the electoral college does provide for that. But I think the messaging is wrong, saying, oh, well, if the popular vote doesn't count as much as the electoral vote, then why does my vote even count? Well, it does, because you're not just voting on the presidential election, like you're voting on your county DA, you're voting in this election cycle in a state house and state senator representatives, and those people's those positions affect your life. Those legislators affect your life much more directly than necessarily the president who's elected president. So I think that everyone's vote does count, because it could just be like you could have a House rep that wins by 100 votes. What if like 50 of those people didn't come, or if 200 of those people didn't come, like that, or that would sway like a smaller race, but a very important race. So I think it's our right to get out as a citizen, to get out and vote. Think about what our founding fathers and just the pioneers that came over here and created America had to fight for. They were fleeing like the monarchy system, where you couldn't elect your leaders. It was just kind of passed down through a family bloodline. And so the fact that the government was created for the people, that's part of our duty as a citizens, for the government to remain still for the people, is to get out and cast our vote, because it really shows like where the direction America wants to go. So it really should be, I think it should be a national holiday, in my opinion, for everyone to get off work on election day, whether you voted early or not.
And be paid while you're off work.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, like a PTO day. So yes. I think that I would just say to people, no, your vote does count. Don't think it, because you could be that one vote or of a few that basically helps decide the election of your state leader. So.
And what about you, Seth? What do you say to people, young and old, who say my vote doesn't count?
I say, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain. Please stop posting on Facebook. But no, really, I mean, Winslow's right. I mean, a lot of these races are close. I mean, the presidential election in Georgia last year was less than 12,000 votes out of like 8 million cast. I mean, it's those numbers may not be exactly right, but feels right. I mean, they are close, and it is important. And there are a lot of places in the world where you don't get this option. You don't get to vote. And I several times, especially when I was younger, would go and vote. And, I'm one of those that tends to vote the whole ballot. And I'd get down there and say, well, I don't know, I wonder what a state clerk of court does. You learn more about the system in your community and the people who are in it by being engaged. And, I would also say that voting is sort of the baseline. That's your entry level into civic participation and involving yourself in the government. That the next step is, find out who these people are, and reach out to them if you have a question or a problem or an issue, or if you feel like they don't understand what they're doing at the city council level or county commission level is going to affect your business or your home or your taxes. I mean, this is a Democratic republic, and your rights as a citizen don't end after election day.
Right. And my final question for you both, if the election were held today, who do you think would win out of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and why? Let's start with you, Winslow.
I'm going to pull up an email that I received because it showed some numbers and I didn't memorize them.
Okay.
Okay. Right now, I think it would be Trump at this point in time. Doesn't mean Kamala can't win, because she could, but as of right now, so Georgia, this is for Trump. There's a plus 2.1 percent. Arizona has a plus 2.1. North Carolina, we have a plus 0.9. Wisconsin, we're just minus 0.1. Pennsylvania, we're only minus 0.2. Michigan, we're minus 0.5. And Nevada, we're minus 0.5. So these numbers are actually much. So if you're looking at the minus numbers and the negative, so that's basically saying that, so we're just down 0.1% in Wisconsin. These numbers were much smaller than they were 4 years ago and even 8 years ago. And Trump ended up winning 8 years ago. So, so right at this point in time, it's going to be so close. Like, it's so close. But if you look at these numbers and the trends from 4 years ago and 8 years ago, Trump may have it. So this is what I'm thinking right this second. Of course, you just never know in the next few weeks how the course can change. But at this point in time, I think it would be Trump. And that's not just wishful thinking. It's just what these numbers are showing.
Okay. And what about you, Seth? If the election were held today, who do you think would win out of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris?
I think it would be Trump if it was today. I mean, the polls have been sort of trending in that direction. He's, reached out. He's trying to get every vote possible. I think, frankly, some of the enthusiasm that people have for him is because of what he's gone through in the past year with, now multiple assassination attempts, and, multiple, criminal and civil trials that I think some people look at and it feels like, and he says it's a political persecution. And I think a lot of other people kind of look at what's going on and say, yeah, you know what? I think they are just against him. It feels like momentum is against, with him. And Winslow just talked about some polls and when you compare to, those matchups with Joe Biden and the 2016 matchups with Hillary Clinton, one of those he won, one of those he lost. Those polls were not as good for him as the ones that are coming out now.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, Seth. Thank you, Winslow, for agreeing to be on the podcast. I feel like both of you were such awesome, energetic, passionate spokespeople for the youth and the Republican Party. So thank you again for sitting down with me.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Crystal.
Come on, let's go on a journey. Sit back, buckle up, enjoy the ride.